So maybe we'll kick it off there with the vaccine, and you're pretty plugged in the healthcare community. What are your expectations for when we will see a vaccine, and if we can see anything resembling a normal economy until then?
Well, let me start with the normal economy, and we'll get to the vaccine pretty quickly. I think there are three levels of re-engagement here that are going to allow consumers, Americans, to feel good about going back to work, and even more importantly, going back into the economy. And I think the latter is a harder problem to solve. First, we're going to have the three T's: testing, tracking, and tracing, which is really, do you have the disease, how we track it, how we trace it. And that's the best we have. And so we're going to have all the social distancing and all the precautions we're going to need in the workplace and in the economy. But that's not going to build the kind of trust that are going to have people be open about getting back into the economy, feeling good about going back to the workplace. The next step before a vaccine, which is going to be 18 months or so away, I believe, before it's at scale, is really antibody testing. And antibody testing has a number of perspectives to it. Number one, yes or no, do you have the antibody? That is not good enough. The second part of it needs to be a level of sensitivity about what type of antigen do you have and how high an immunity do you have, and is it the right one? And that work is now underway in a number of different places. My family foundation is now funding the last mile of an antibody test that has 100% sensitivity and 96% sensitivity around what kind of antigen it is. We're working on what level of immunity does it need to have, and we're working on how to get it out semi-automated, kits out to labs, and ultimately into assay machines like the Luminex, where we can go worldwide with this capability. But the idea is if we can test people and stratify them by their level of risk. Am I immune? How am I immune? How much immunity do I have? And then if I'm not, am I at risk or am I sick? We can begin to let people go to work, let people go into the economy, and protect those that are either currently sick or have a high level of risk of getting sick. That begins to open up the economy and give people the confidence that I can go back to work safely, that I can go back to work more close to normal, which we'll never really be back at, and then I can go into the economy. Once the vaccine shows up, I think we have a much more open chance of having a better economy, people feeling good about the workplace until the next pandemic comes along. And I think that's the harder issue is, how do we think about appropriate pandemic planning on a global basis that allows us to understand where we can have a just-in-time economy, but at the same time have a buffer economy for the things that we can't produce quickly.
What you're describing when it comes to the antibody testing and even the tracing and just being able to manage society based on how much risk you face. I mean, it's happening, but it's happening so piecemeal. What do you make so far of the federal government's response and the fact that it really is up to the states and the governors and in many ways the private sector, and it's not clear whether any of this is actually happening right now on a wider scale?
Well, we talk about testing in the public domain, in the media, in the political dynamic as if it's a thing, and it's not. It's a series of things. Do you have the disease, yes or no? Do you have an antibody, yes or no? Is it the right antibody? And then finally, is it at a level of immunity that actually neutralizes the virus? And nobody's spending any time explaining to the American public that process. It is so highly politicized and decentralized. I'm all for crowdsourcing, but this is crazy. This is the wrong way to approach this problem, because we're either going to have a second wave of this thing or we're going to have another pandemic soon enough. And if we do it again this way, we can't keep shutting down the economy and putting 30+ million people out of work every time people get sick.
Yeah, Mark, it's David. Our last guest, Ricky Sandler, who's engendered a lot of controversy here that I'm looking at, was getting at the very thing you're talking about. And as somebody who sort of understands both sides of it, given your work as a CEO, where do you come down? I mean, he's saying, you know, if you didn't hear it, we need to just get herd immunity. Everybody's got to get over it, so to speak, and not be so scared, because the chance of dying of this if you're below 75 years of age is very, very small. Is there credence to that, or would that be a foolish approach?
This isn't like the flu, where we have a lot of herd immunity. And I don't know that Americans are ready to make the trade-off. You can see it in the surveys that have come out over the last few days, that they want to take the chance of getting sick and going through this horrible disease just to build herd immunity. Now, let's go back to high school algebra. The problem we have with all the data we're looking at around deaths and incidences and tests is we don't have a common denominator. And for those of us that paid attention to algebra, or those of us that had to relearn it to help our kids at home, you need a common denominator. The common denominator is how many people have been tested, and we can test for antibody, and we may have herd immunity to some degree. We just don't know. So let's get the antibody tests right. Let's get them approved. Let's make sure they're appropriately efficient and effective. And then let's test the population, understand where we are, and then have the argument over herd immunity from there.